Welcome. Asaph was a temple musician who worked with King David on the production of the book of Psalms. About a dozen of the Psalms are given with Asaph as the author. Together, David and Asaph produced a book with prayers and meditations and praises to God, which was for every situation in the future history of Israel, for times of great joy, but also for times of great sadness. For these psalms, David and Asaph often based their psalm around their own experience, and yet their psalms were not about the past. They were about the future, and often written in the spirit of prophecy, describing what would happen in the future to Israel, and importantly, showing God's people how to pray in these difficult and often desperate situations. Today we're looking at one of Asaph's psalms, Psalm 74. My name is Keith Simons. I'm a Bible teacher from England. I present these talks how you can understand the King James Bible, looking at the book of Psalms. Each time we look at a different psalm, verse by verse and word by word, seeking to understand its meaning, and today we're looking at Psalm 74. And as we'll soon see, it was written for a truly desperate time in Israel. It's entirely a prayer bringing to God the troubles of the nation, a prayer pleading for God's help in that situation. But I said that these psalms were based around things in David's and Asaph's experience, and we do find a similar incident that occurred earlier on in the life of David, perhaps at a time when Asaph had been born and was aware of what was happening. 1 Samuel chapter 22, verses 18 to 19, describes how Doeg, the Edomite, attacked the town called Nob, where the priests lived and where the tabernacle, God's house, stood. And Doeg destroyed it totally, killing all of the priests and their families, a desperate time in Israel. Yet that terrible incident, the murder of 85 priests and their families, yet that incident is not what Asaph is describing in his psalm, because he speaks in the spirit of prophecy. He looks ahead to future troubles in Israel, to the time when the book of Lamentations was written, to the time of the Babylonian captivity, to future times even beyond that, to the time when the government of Rome and its mighty army destroyed Jerusalem. He gives prayers for God's people in these desperate situations, that when everything seems wrong, when the total destruction of everything that belongs to God has taken place, yet still Asaph teaches the people to turn to God in prayer and to depend on him totally, to depend on him even more in these situations. The ancient heading of Psalm 74 is Maskil of Asaph. Maskil means learning, teaching. This psalm is teaching us how we are to pray in desperate situations. On to verse 1. Asaph writes, O God, why hast thou cast us off forever? Why doth thine anger smoke against the sheep of thy pasture? And how desperate is that? God has cast us off. He's rejected us. His anger is like smoke, like burning, and not burning against his enemies, but against his own people, the sheep of thy pasture. A mark of this psalm is the tenderness with which God's people are described. God, these are the people who you love, who you care about, and yet they are suffering so much because God has allowed them to suffer because of their sins. But nevertheless, God is the God who forgives. God is the God who restores. So Asaph prays in verse 2, remember thy congregation, which thou hast purchased of old. Your congregation, your people. It seems to us as if, God, you've cast us off forever. It seems, God, as if these troubles will have no end. But these people are your congregation, your people. Of old, long ago, you purchased them, you redeemed them or rescued them from slavery in Egypt to be your own people. Remember them. And then God's people are called the rod of thine, of God's inheritance, which thou hast redeemed. The rod of thine inheritance. That's the description here of Israel's people. Why are they called the rod of God's inheritance? Well, your inheritance is your possession, your land which you own. And your possession, your land, has to be measured out. How do you measure it out? With a rod, with a long stick. And this is how they used to measure out inheritances in ancient Israel. They'd measure them out with their rod, and that area was marked out as belonging to a particular person, just as of all the people on earth, of all the nations on earth, God chose Israel, the Jewish people, to be his own special people, measured out, as it were, with a rod, to be his people, to be his ownership. And he didn't just get them by measuring them, but by redeeming them. We've already mentioned this, how God rescued his people when they were slaves in Egypt. And Asaph prays to God, remember your congregation. And he also prays, remember this Mount Zion, wherein thou hast dwelt. Mount Zion, the hill in Jerusalem where the temple stood. And we're going to be drawn, our attention is to be drawn to the place of the temple over and over in this psalm. This is the place, God, where you chose to live among your people. But now, as we shall discover, Mount Zion and the temple itself are utterly ruined. Verse 3, lift up thy feet unto the perpetual desolations, even all that the enemy hath done wickedly in the sanctuary. The holy place, is now a place of desolation, a place of destruction. So Asaph prays to God, lift up thy feet. It means move quickly. It means like there's trouble, so you should lift up your feet. You should run quickly across to deal with the situation. That is what Asaph is asking God to do. But the time factor here, these are perpetual desolations. The Hebrew word for perpetual here is the same word that is translated forever in verse 1, in verse 10, in verse 19. Oh, these troubles seem to be forever, but how quickly will they be sorted out if God acts, if God lifts up his feet, if God comes to rescue us? But first, before we think about that, let's think about how bad the desolation is. Verse 4, thine enemies roar in the midst of thy congregations. Roar, shout out their victory shout. Where? In the midst of God's congregations. where God's people once prayed and sang their praise to God, the enemies roar. They set up their ensigns for signs. Ensigns and signs are almost the same word in English. The Hebrew word is just variations of the same word. They set up their signs for signs, or where there should be signs and marks to show that this is a place of worship, a holy place, the house of God. They are setting up their military signs to show that they've conquered and they've destroyed this place. Verse 5 remembers back to the history of the temple, this beautiful building that Solomon built for the honour of God, and it declares, a man was famous, according as he had lifted up axes upon the thick trees. Oh yes, it was great work to build the temple. The vast beams, the giant trees that needed to be cut down. And people were praised for their skill in cutting down those thick trees. But now, verse 6, the enemies, they break down the carved work thereof at once with axes and hammers. Oh, the axes are at work once again, but not to build this time, but to destroy what is beautiful, the carved work, the work of fine craftsmen who took those trees and carved them with beautiful symbols. And now axes and hammers and fire. Verse 7, they have cast fire into thy sanctuary. They burnt the place down. They have defiled by casting down the dwelling place of thy name to the ground. The temple is called the dwelling place of God's name, the place where God had placed his name, where he'd shown his perfect character to his people. The name in the Bible often describes the character. God's character was displayed here. It was clearly shown by this building, which had been constructed according to God's own plan, and now destroyed, ruined. And they've not finished their efforts, these enemies, to destroy, because in verse 8 they said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. They have burned up all the synagogues of God in the land. It's doubted whether at the time of Asaph synagogues did exist, whether there were local buildings for prayer that existed through Israel. We know only of the temple, the great house of God at Jerusalem. Were there local places? We don't know. The word which is translated synagogues here means a time or a place appointed for God's people to meet. But the enemies, when they saw whatever this represents, they destroyed it. They burned it. Imagine in your country if all the places of worship were burned down and ruined, an act by enemies to totally put an end to the religion of the true God. This is what Asaph is describing. How terrible. What destruction. Let's pray to God. Let's ask him to show us what can happen now. Let's ask for a word from a prophet to tell us what to do. Even that fails in the time which Asaph is describing. Verse 9, we see not our signs. There is no more any prophet, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long. There are no words from God, nothing to direct us in this situation. No one can say how long these troubles will last, when there will be an end to them. No one, of course, except God. So Asaph, in verse 10, turns to God in desperate and urgent prayer. O God, how long shall the adversary reproach? Shall the enemy blaspheme thy name forever? The adversary, the enemy, the person who's carried out this destruction, the army that has destroyed Jerusalem and its temple. But they're doing this against God. They're reproaching. That could mean to taunt, to mock, to laugh at, even to blaspheme. And then in the later part of the verse, shall the enemy blaspheme? That could mean despise. Why should the enemy show hate for the name of God? And suddenly, at that point, we become aware of something that is so often present in these desperate psalms. Asaph, the author, is not saying this is our troubles. He's saying this is God's troubles. God is suffering with us because the enemy is blaspheming God's most holy name. The enemy, by his actions, has acted against God. Surely God will not allow this to continue forever. Verse 11, why withdrawest thou thy hand, even thy right hand? Pluck it out of thy bosom. The right hand, the hand which for most people is the strongest hand. Yet Asaph pictures God taking that right hand, that strongest hand, and placing it by his bosom, his chest, inside the fold of his garment, holding back, not using his right hand to deal with the situation and to save his people. So Asaph calls on God to pluck his hand, or to take his hand out from under his clothes, out from his chest, and to act in power, to save his people as he has so often done before. Verse 13, for God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. God is my King of old. God, these enemies think they have the victory. They think they've won over God's people. They think they've destroyed us totally. But I know who has always been my King. It's God. God who has the power to, and who did in the past, work salvation in the midst of the earth. Salvation, rescue for God's people. Where did God do this? In the midst of the earth. That's a Hebrew phrase. It appears in Exodus 8:22. It seems to mean God does these things in full view. God brings salvation, and even the enemies see it. When God saves his people from their anger, from their wrath, from their cruelty. Wasn't this what happened at the Red Sea? When God divided the Red Sea and Israel's people walked in safety through it on dry ground, whereas the sea closed in and drowned Pharaoh and all his army underneath its waves. Let's remember that incident. Verse 13. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. It was God's strength that split apart the Red Sea. End of verse 13. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Verse 14. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces. Who are these dragons? Who is Leviathan? Well, the dragons, firstly, the Hebrew word is translated differently in the King James Bible. In Genesis 1:21, the word for dragons here is translated whales. But in Exodus 7:12, this same word is translated serpents, snakes. Thou breakest the heads of the whales, or the snakes in the waters, the sea creatures, the sea monsters. But is that what we're talking about? The death of great sea creatures? Let's go on a little further. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces. Leviathan, the great enemy that appears in Job chapter 41 and seems to describe a crocodile. But when we find the same word in Isaiah chapter 27 and verse 1, it seems to be describing the king of Egypt or perhaps of Babylon. So what's happening here in the psalm? Who are the dragons? Who is Leviathan? It's referring to the great leaders of Egypt's army and how these powerful people, these people who seemed as fierce as monsters, how they were killed in the Red Sea. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces. Yes, utterly defeated those evil enemies as we need. The evil enemies who've destroyed God's dwelling place. We need God to act against them too now. But what does it say at the end of verse 14 about Leviathan? Thou gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Okay, this is not describing cannibals. The word for people there in the Hebrew, and therefore also sometimes in the King James Version, is not describing human people, but a group of whatever, a group of animals it can be. So Proverbs chapter 30 verse 25 refers to ants, the little insects, and it calls them people. And what we've got a description of here is that those dead bodies killed by the Red Sea coming back in and covering over Egypt's army, even the captains, even the leaders, even Pharaoh himself. Well, those dead bodies were washed up, and not the human people, but those who inhabit the wilderness, the animals that inhabit the wilderness, come to feast on the dead bodies because no one is going to bury those dead bodies. But the attention here isn't drawn to the troubles and the punishment that affected that cruel army which tried to kill Israel, but rather on God's mercy to his people. Verse 15, Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood. Thou driedest up mighty rivers. Cleave, to split apart. God split apart the rock, and from it came a fountain of water, a spring of fresh water, and even a flood in the wilderness to provide fresh water to Israel's people. But what else did God do for them? Thou driedest up mighty rivers. Yes, he brought Israel's people, God brought them into the promised land through the Jordan River. And God arranged for the Jordan River too to be dry, so that Israel's people could walk across it on dry ground. Now the Jordan River here is called Mighty Rivers, and so it appears to the inhabitants of Israel, where most rivers dry up in the summer months, or where much of the land just has little streams and brooks, or nothing at all, because much of Israel's land is just dry land. But to them the River Jordan was their greatest river, and so it is called Mighty Rivers here. Yes, God dried up that river so that Israel's people could pass through. But what of our current problems? Are they perpetual problems? Verse 3, are they really going to be forever? Verse 1, what is God's nature? How does God act? How does God deal with these things? Let's think about God. Verse 6 16. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. God, you rule over the day, and you rule over the night too. You created both these things. You created the night so that it would end, because you prepared the light and the sun to replace that night with day again. God, could it be that these perpetual troubles are not really forever? Is it not in your nature to turn round the situation, to bring the light and the sun and the promise of day to us, to restore us again after these terrible troubles? Verse 17. Thou hast set all the borders of the earth. You chose where the land would end and where the sea would begin. You've arranged this so that there are limits on the power of the sea, that it cannot simply flood the earth whenever it chooses. Thou hast made summer and winter. Yes, there is the difficult, the hard times of winter, but you are also the maker of summer. You've made this that there should be changes in this world. And God, we very much need these changes now to save us from this enemy. But it is not our enemy that we ask you to save us from, but your own enemy. Verse 18, remember this, that the enemy hath reproached, O Lord, and that the foolish people have blasphemed thy name. O God, they've done these things against you and against your people whom you love. Verse 19, O deliver not the soul of thy turtle dove unto the multitude of the wicked. God's people were called sheep in verse 1. Now they're called God's turtle dove. Why the turtle dove? It's a medium-sized bird. We have pigeons here, which we're not very fond of at all. They eat everything. But the turtle dove was, in ancient Israel, considered to be a much more pleasant animal, a gentle animal, an animal which people were fond of. And they saw how the turtle doves would gather in preparation for mating, how the birds would so often be together. It became to them a symbol of love. Yes, God loves his people. O deliver not the soul of thy turtle dove unto the multitude of the wicked. There are so many of them opposing God's people, and God's people like one turtle dove standing alone. O God, will you not care for the soul of your turtle dove, for the inner life of your turtle dove? Will you not restore your people? They are so poor and weak, but forget not the congregation of thy poor forever. And then, as if this is not enough reason for God to act, verse 20 says, have respect unto the covenant. The Hebrew for have respect means look. Look intently at the covenant, at the promises you made that established your relationship with Israel. And when you look at that, you'll see that the time has come to rescue God's people from their current troubles. For the dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of cruelty. Habitations means houses, places where people live. Here it's the habitations of cruelty, the place where robbers live. Every dark place, there are robbers to attack your people and to destroy your people. But God, look at your covenant. See your promises and act. Verse 21, O let not the oppressed return ashamed. They'd be ashamed if God didn't keep his promises. But God is a God who always keeps his promises. And so God, I pray that you act, and that you will let the poor and needy praise thy name. Give them that reason to praise you, to honour you, so that honour might come to your name. In the past, verse 18, foolish people have blasphemed thy name. How much more wonderful when the poor and needy praise God, when the people who've suffered so much in these troubles praise the name of God. Verse 22, arise, O God, plead thine own cause. He states explicitly what he's been hinting at so far. God, this was your temple. God, these are your people. God, this is your holy name that is being blasphemed. So God, when you act, it is for your own cause, your own sake that you act. Remember how the foolish man reproacheth thee daily. Every day these problems are continuing. Every day these enemies are causing the problems. And the psalm ends, not with the victory yet, because this is still a prayer in faith and a prayer to be prayed in the greatest troubles, but a prayer now with confidence and faith to God that he will act to put an end to these troubles. And so verse 23 reads, forget not the voice of thine enemies, the tumult, the noise of those that rise up against thee, increaseth continually. And there the prayer ends, still waiting, but still looking to God, still trusting God that he will act in accordance with his own promises and save his people. Please write to me. My email address is 333kjv@gmail.com. My name again is Keith Simons, and that email address that I'm hoping you'll write to, 333kjv@gmail.com. And now in conclusion, the whole of Psalm 74, Maskil of Asaph. O God, why hast thou cast us off forever? Why doth thine anger smoke against the sheep of thy pasture? Remember thy congregation, which thou hast purchased of old, the rod of thine inheritance, which thou hast redeemed, this Mount Zion, wherein thou hast dwelt. Lift up thy feet unto the perpetual desolations, even all that the enemy hath done wickedly in the sanctuary. Thine enemies roar in the midst of thy congregations. They set up their ensigns for signs. A man was famous, according as he had lifted up axes upon the thick trees. But now they break down the carved work thereof at once, with axes and hammers. They have cast fire into thy sanctuary. They have defiled by casting down the dwelling place of thy name to the ground. They said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. They have burned up all the synagogues of God in the land. We see not our signs. There is no more any prophet. Neither is there among us any that knoweth how long. O God, how long shall the adversary reproach? Shall the enemy blaspheme thy name forever? Why withdrawest thou thy hand, even thy right hand? Pluck it out of thy bosom. For God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood, thou driedest up mighty rivers. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun, thou hast set all the borders of the earth, thou hast made summer and winter. Remember this, that the enemy hath reproached, O Lord, and that the foolish people have blasphemed thy name. O, deliver not the soul of thy turtle dove unto the multitude of the wicked. Forget not the congregation of thy poor forever. Have respect unto the covenant. For the dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of cruelty. O let not the oppressed return ashamed. Let the poor and needy praise thy name. Arise, O God, plead thine own cause. Remember how the foolish man reproacheth thee daily. Forget not the voice of thine enemies. The tumult of those that rise up against thee increaseth continually.